everyone. A very warm welcome back to our series on the glories of Sri Vrindavan Dham. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Divishesha Shunyavadi Pashchacha Deshatarane. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So, today I would like to discuss the glories of Srila Jiva Goswami and his Ishtadeva, Shri Radha Damodar. Naturally, our lectures on the glories of Vrindavan have recently evolved into discussing the six Goswamis and their Ishtadevas, their personal deities. So far we've done Sanatana Goswami and Madan Mohan, Rupa Goswami and Radha Govinda Dev, Govindaji, and Gopal Bhatta Goswami and Radha Raman. So today we'll do Jiva Goswami and Radha Damodar, but actually this presents a particular challenge. And how is that? Well, as I mentioned in the previous class, the challenge about speaking about Gopal Bhatta Goswami was that there wasn't a lot of information about him in Shastra. But the challenge about speaking about Jiva Goswami is that there's so much information. One could write an entire book about him. But I only have 90 minutes. I was remembering that verse I quoted a couple months ago in the Bible about Jesus Christ. It's in John 25. Quote, "And there are also many other things that Jesus did, which, if they were written one by one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that would have to be written," unquote. But it's especially, or it is especially important to discuss the life and teachings of Srila Jiva Goswami. For Prabhupada has written in the Teachings of Lord Caitanya, chapter 17, quote, "To understand Lord Caitanya, one has to follow the direct disciples of Lord Caitanya, the six Goswamis, and especially the path chalked out by Srila Jiva Goswami." Prabhupada wrote that. And as we mentioned, speaking about Jiva Goswami also means speaking about what is most dear to him, his beloved Radha Damodar. That Radha Damodar are very dear to him is evident in the Bengali song we also mentioned some lectures ago. It's called Jaya Radha Krishna Giti. And therein it's said, Jaya Radha Damodar, Radha Damodara, Radhe, Jiva Goswami Prandanahe. All glories to Radha and Damodar, the treasure of Jiva Goswami's heart. And Radha and Damodar are dear to all of us as well. And how is that? Because they're very dear to Srila Prabhupada. On the Jaladuta, on the way to America, Srila Prabhupada wrote a famous quote, "Today the ship is plying very smoothly. I feel better, but I'm feeling separation from Sri Vrindavan and my lords, Govinda, Gopinath, and Radha Damodar." Now in the Gaur Gonadesha Dipika by Kavi Karnapur, it's stated that in the spiritual world, in Goloka Vrindavan, Jiva Goswami is the Gopi Vilas Manjari. There's also some description of her. Vilas Manjari's bodily hue is golden, like a kitaki flower, and her silken dress is black and gold, like the stripes of a bumblebee. And she is just, quote, 4 days shy of 13 years old, unquote. And one of her services is that whenever bath water is required for Srimati Radharani, she and her other gopi friends, they go to the Jamuna or some well, and they collect that water in beautiful golden jugs inlaid with precious stones. Now, as far as the appearance of Vilas Manjari as Jiva Goswami in this world, we know that he, Jiva Goswami, was born in Ramakeli in West Bengal as the son of Anupam, who was the younger brother of Rupa Goswami and Sanatana Goswami, making Jiva Goswami their nephew and them his uncles. And at one point, all these three brothers, Rup, Sanatana, and Anupam, they were forcibly employed in the service of the Nawab Hussain Shah, a Muslim ruler at the time. Now, our scriptures relate that Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu stopped at Ramakeli on his way to Vrindavan, specifically to meet Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis for the first time. And on that occasion, Srila Jiva Goswami was only 3 years old. And after being greeted by Rupa and Sanatana as he entered Ramakeli, Lord Caitanya came to their residence. And as Mahaprabhu was entering the garden of their home, Jiva Goswami was on his mother's lap. And as soon as Sri Jiva saw Lord Caitanya, he jumped up. It's written that his mother was stunned by little Jiva's spontaneous attraction to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And as Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis were conversing with Mahaprabhu, little Jiva hid behind a tree to watch and hear what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was telling his father and his uncles. And in fact, Lord Caitanya was telling them that he was going to empower them to establish and spread his Sankirtan mission all over the world. And all the while, little Jiva was listening to this. It's described with a big smile on his face. Then at one point, Lord Caitanya turned and pointed to Jiva, Sri Jiva, telling Rupa and Sanatana that the work that you will leave unfinished, this boy, Jiva, will continue in the future. What a prophecy. The work that you will leave unfinished, this boy, Jiva, will continue in the future. Now, it's described that Mahaprabhu's relatively short stay in Ramakeli left an indelible impression upon our Jiva Goswami. And at that age, at 3, he gave up playing with his young friends, and he started studying Shastra and worshipping deities of Krishna and Balaram that his mother had given him. It's described that throughout his childhood he would spend a lot of time with those Krishna Balaram deities. Very often his mother would call him for prasadam, but he'd always come late because he was playing with his deities. He could often be found singing to them, arranging new clothes, it's described, for them, making garlands for them. He was even cooking for them. And sometimes when it would get very cold, I read he would remove his chadar and offer it to his deities. Sometimes I read his mother would find him lovingly embracing, very intensely embracing Krishna and Balaram. All this for a child of 3, 4, or 5 years old. Certainly every Krishna-conscious mother and father would love to see something akin to this in their infant sons or daughters. Actually, I heard recently that Srila Prabhupada once related in a conversation in Bengali with some prominent guests how one of his close godbrothers worshipped Radha Gopinath deities as a 7-year-old child. And Prabhupada related that one day in his village, that boy's village, it became unseasonably cold. And as a result, the young boy started shivering and trembling uncontrollably. So his parents rushed him to a doctor who told him not to worry and prescribed some medication for their son. But after a few days, the medication wasn't working. And the boy just kept shivering and trembling. Then one night, that boy's deities of Radha Gopinath appeared to him in a dream and told him that when the temperature had dropped, he had forgotten to offer them a warm shawl. So when he woke up, he quickly put some little shawls around his Radha Gopinath deities. And Prabhupada said that as soon as he did that, he himself warmed up and his shivering and his trembling stopped. So Prabhupada told that story about his godbrother. Hare Krishna. So one night when Jiva Goswami was 6 years old, Krishna and Balaram appeared to him in a dream. And they said, quote, "Dear Jiva, since you are so attached to us, we want to tell you a secret. It is we who have appeared in the age of Kali as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Lord Nityananda. In time, we will empower you to spread our message." And then Krishna and Balaram manifested in the dream as Gaurnitai. And in the dream, Jiva Goswami bowed down to Lord Caitanya, who embraced him and said, quote, "My dear Jiva, I offer you to my Nitai," unquote. Then Lord Nityananda embraced him in the dream, and he said, quote, "Jiva, I bless you that Gaur Prem will soon arise within your heart," unquote. And as the dream broke, and Jiva Goswami woke up, it said that, quote, he who was always shouting, "Krishna Balaram, Krishna Balaram," started shouting, Gauranga Nityananda, Gauranga Nityananda. And hearing him shouting, his mother woke up. And she asked her little son, Sri Jiva, "What's happening?" And little Jiva said, quote, "Mother, when can I give up everything in this world and run to Navadvip and be with Gauranga Nityananda," unquote. And she tried to calm him down by saying, quote, "Very soon, my dear child, very soon," unquote. And so it happened. 4 years later, when he was 10, his mother left this world. And by that time, his father had also left. Anupam had also left. And Jiva Goswami, he just left home. He's 10 years old. And he walked to Navadvip, where Lord Nityananda took him on a very famous parikrama of the Dham. And as Jiva Goswami is our Acharya, we must follow in his footsteps when the opportunity arises, and also visit Navadvip Mayapur Dham. We've been speaking so much about visiting Vrindavan Dham these last months. But there's no difference between Vrindavan and Mayapur. And of course, Mayapur, there's a lot of mercy there. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is even more merciful than Krishna. So really to enter into Vrindavan Dham, we must have the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Panchatattva. So very often devotees first go to Mayapur and then they come to Vrindavan. So Jiva Goswami did the same. First he went to Navadvip, Mayapur. And we should try as often as possible to go there. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he once said, quote, "In Kali Yuga, as things become more and more degraded, the spiritual potency of Navadvip Dham itself increases more and more." And he said, on the very last day of Kali Yuga, Navadvip Dham will be the most merciful. It's always merciful. As Kali Yuga, the evil influence of Kali Yuga develops, the mercy of the Dham becomes even greater. But the greatest point of Navadvip's Dham will be on the last day of Kali Yuga. Wow. So what was Bhaktivinoda Thakur's conclusion? Quote, people in Kali Yuga should give up everything and run to Navadvip Dham. Unquote. He says, Gora Dhamma, Gora Nam, Gora Rupa Guna, Aparada Nahi Mane, Tarite Nipuna. This means the name of Gauranga, the Dham of Gauranga, the form of Gauranga, the pastimes of Gauranga, don't consider offenses. The name of Gauranga doesn't consider offenses. The Dham of Gauranga doesn't consider offenses. The form of Gauranga doesn't consider offenses. The pastimes of Gauranga do not consider offenses. And that's why Prabhupada has asked us to chant, Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Go Bhaktivinda. Before we chant, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So now our Jiva Goswami is, he's in Navadvip as a young boy, 10 years old. Now one day when Jiva Goswami was with Lord Nityananda, he expressed a desire to go and see Lord Caitanya, who was in Jagannath Puri at the time. But Lord Nityananda told him that Mahaprabhu wanted him to join his uncles, Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis, in Vrindavan. Nitai said, Mahaprabhu tumara gane, diya chena data bhumi, sigra tumi yaho Vrindavana. Quote, Mahaprabhu has given a special land to your family. Immediately go to that land of Braja. Mahaprabhu has given a special land to your family. Immediately go to that place of Braj. So like we heard the other day, how Gopal Bhatta Goswami accepted Vani, Mahaprabhu's instructions, over Vapu, Mahaprabhu's personal association. So Srila Jiva Goswami did the same. And he started making his way to Vrindavan. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has written that on his way to Vrindavan, Lord Caitanya appeared to him again in a dream. Bhaktivinoda Thakur writes, quote, one night along the way to Vrindavan, Gauranga appeared to Jiva in a dream and said, quote, go to Mathura. You and your uncles, Rupa and Sanatana, are all very dear to me. Just confirming the same thing that Lord Nityananda had told him. Then Mahaprabhu went on in the dream. Together, you should compose books that will illuminate the path of devotional service. Dedicate your life to the service of my form as Radha and Krishna, and always contemplate their pastimes in Braja. Always contemplate their pastimes in Braja. So as aspiring devotees, we can also imbibe such instructions. Wherever we may be, whatever time of the day it is, we can also sometimes remember what Radha and Krishna are doing at any particular time of the day in Vrindavan. That's a good way to remember Radha and Krishna, because they have a schedule. It's described in Shastra what they do from morning till night and through the night until the next morning. And although we're aspiring, that's an easy way to remember Radha and Krishna. Oh, it's 6 o'clock, so they're doing this, 12 o'clock, they're doing that. This is what it means to be conscious of Krishna, Krishna consciousness. Especially to think of Radha and Krishna in Braj. In Krishna book I was reading the other day in chapter 15, Srila Prabhupada writes, quote, we have to meditate upon Krishna, Radha Krishna. That is real meditation. Krishna himself taught us that the Brahma Muhurta hour should be utilized for meditation on Radha Krishna. By doing so, we will feel transcendently pleased and satisfied. Unquote. And it's so true, isn't it? So on the way to Vrindavan, Jiva Goswami passed through Benares or Kashi, and there he met Madhusudan Vachaspati, who was a disciple of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. And he ended up spending 10 years studying philosophy from that learned scholar in preparation for his service in Vrindavan. I was thinking that's a long time, but we also have the example of our beloved Srila Prabhupada. It's often said, quote, he spent a lifetime in preparation for coming to the West to deliver us. So 10 years studying under that scholar. Prabhupada confirms this actually in a lecture I was listening to in San Francisco, June 28, 1971. Prabhupada said, quote, at the age of 10 years, Jiva Goswami, he left home and went to Benares, the seat of Sanskrit scholars. He learned there Sanskrit very nicely, became a great scholar, and then joined his uncles in Vrindavan, unquote, from a lecture. So by the time that Jiva Goswami finished his studies in Benares, he was 19 years old. And at that time, he was recognized to be the greatest scholar at that time in Benares, Kashi. Unfortunately, it was during his stay in Benares that Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu departed this world. So after his studies in Benares, Jiva Goswami left for Vrindavan. And when he arrived, he was just a little over 20 years old. And upon his arrival, because he was now very famous for many reasons, he was met by all the great devotees who were living in Vrindavan at that time. How could I name them all? There's so many. But Srila Prabodhananda Saraswati, Lokanath Goswami, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, Raghunath Das Goswami, Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, etc. And the next day, or a few days later, Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis took Jiva Goswami on Braj Mandal Parikrama. Now he'd already done Gaur Mandala Parikrama with Lord Nityananda, and now he's doing Braj Mandala Parikrama with Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis. And they introduced him to all the pastime places that wherein they were building temples and installing deities, etc. And after a few days when he settled in, the young Jiva Goswami got his first service from Srila Rupa Goswami. And what was that? To proofread a book Rupa Goswami had just finished, the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which Srila Prabhupada later translated as our Nectar of Devotion. And Rupa Goswami was so pleased with Jiva Goswami's work that he later instructed him to write a commentary on the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And at that time, if I remember correctly, Sanatana Goswami was writing his Vaishnav Toshini, and he also later asked Jiva Goswami to write a commentary on that book as well. And then, not long after he had arrived in Sri Vrindavan Dham, Sri Rupa Goswami formally initiated him as his one and only disciple. Rupa Goswami only had one disciple, Srila Jiva Goswami. So one day a scholar, I believe he was from South India, his name was Balabhacharya, came to Vrindavan. And while visiting Rupa Goswami, he looked through some of his works, and he suggested some changes to one manuscript that Rupa Goswami was writing at the time. And Jiva Goswami was sitting nearby and overheard their conversation. And although the suggested changes were actually unnecessary, Rupa Goswami very humbly said, yes, okay, of course, he accepted them. But Jiva Goswami was very upset that his spiritual master's perfect compositions might be compromised. So, later when Balabhachari went to the Jamuna for a bath, Jiva Goswami followed him, and a debate ensued between the two, in which Jiva refuted this Brahmana's proposed changes and proved that Rupa Goswami's composition was faultless. So after returning from the river, this Balabhacharya told Rupa Goswami about the debate, and he actually expressed great appreciation for Jiva Goswami's intellect and knowledge of the scripture. But after Balabhacharya had left, Rupa Goswami chastised Jiva Goswami for, it's written, quote, seeking distinction through being the victor in a debate. Seeking distinction through being the victor in a debate. And Rupa Goswami, he told him this was not proper, was not proper conduct for a Vaishnava. And actually Rupa Goswami was so upset with Jiva that he said, quote, now you can neither stay with me nor live in Braj. Go wherever you like, but you must leave here now. Wow. Of course, Jiva Goswami was brokenhearted, and he left, and he went to stay alone in Nandagat, on the banks of the Jamuna River, sort of remote area of Vrindavan. And it's said that he lived in a large alligator hole there. Alligators would dig these holes and stay in the riverside there. So that's where he stayed. And he would only eat raw wheat flour mixed with water. And it's described in time, because of this poor diet, he became seriously ill, and the local villagers feared for his life. So one day, Srila Sanatana Goswami was doing parikrama around Vrindavan, and he came to that spot, and he found Jiva Goswami in this pitiable state. And upon returning to Vrindavan, Sanatana Goswami told Rupa Goswami that banning Jiva Goswami had violated a sadhu's prime duty of being merciful to all living entities, Jivadaya. So Rupa Goswami then went there, and he brought Srila Jiva Goswami back to Vrindavan, and he personally nursed him back to health. So it sounds quite heavy, but he was teaching Srila Jiva Goswami humility. Humiliation comes before humility very often. Of course, there's nothing that Srila Jiva Goswami had to learn, because he's Vilasmacharya in the spiritual world. But Acharya means by example, and sometimes they very kindly go through such situations to teach us that we should be humble in all circumstances. So then later on, in the year 1542, during the month of Kartik, Radha Govinda, the deities of Srila Rupa Goswami, appeared to him in a dream. And in the dream, Radha Govinda switched their form to a deity that had not yet appeared in Vrindavan, the deity of Damodar, Radha Damodar. And in the dream, Damodar said to Sri Rupa Goswami, Sri Rupa, please carefully observe my form, Damodar speaking, and carve a deity just like this as a gift to your disciple Jiva Goswami, for I am very eager to taste the loving devotional service of Jiva Goswami. So Rupa Goswami woke up and his deities had appeared as Damodar in the dream and given this instruction. So over the next few weeks, Rupa Goswami designed and he carved with his own hands the deity of Damodar. And then he offered it to Sri Jiva. Now there wasn't, and there still isn't, a deity of Radharani accompanying Damodar. But it's to be understood, Radha is assumed to be present as, quote, Achintya Shakti, unquote. So therefore we address Damodar as Radha Damodar. So on that glorious occasion of giving Radha Damodar to Jiva Goswami, Rupa Goswami also gave Jiva Goswami the prana mantra for Damodar. And it can be found in Rupa Goswami's book, Stavamala. And I will quote that prana mantra that was given from the heart of Rupa Goswami to Jiva Goswami for worshipping his deity of Damodar. Quote, "Upon Lord Damodar, whose dark bodily luster embarrasses the blue lotus flowers, the splendor of whose silken garments stuns the glory of yellow kumkuma, who enjoys transcendental pastimes in Vrindavan forest, whose chest is fragrant with a brilliant flower garland, and whose magnificent arm rests on Radha's shoulders, let us meditate." Unquote. Prana mantra for Damodar. Now, Srila Jiva Goswami first worshipped that deity in a grove at Sevakunj, and later he had erected a beautiful temple for better facilities for Damodar. And like a number of Vrindavan deities, many years later, when Aurangzeb attacked Vrindavan, Radha Damodar was hidden and eventually taken to Jaipur for protection. But I was reading that when the situation in Vrindavan became favorable, historical records show that Radha Damodar came back to Vrindavan. That deity of Damodar came back to Vrindavan. So the actual deity of Radha Damodar, carved by Rupa Goswami and given to Jiva Goswami, is in Radha Damodar temple in Vrindavan, according to historical records. And the deity in Jaipur is Pratibhu Murti, meaning an expansion, non-different than Damodar in Vrindavan. And oral tradition and written records describe many loving exchanges between Damodar and Jiva Goswami. Sometimes Damodar would request Jiva Goswami to cook something in addition to his regular offerings. He would speak to him. And after fulfilling Damodar's wishes, Jiva Goswami would sit and watch Damodar eat. And once Damodar called Jiva Goswami to come and hear his flute playing. And when Jiva Goswami arrived, he saw the Lord in a very youthful form, decorated with all kinds of ornaments, playing an exceedingly loving tune on his flute. And Srila Jiva Goswami fainted. And after a long time, he regained consciousness, and he composed the following song. Well, it's quite a long song, but some of the verses are Balayita Bhalya Vilasa Jaya Bala Valita Hare. Quote, "O Hari, all glories to your childhood pastimes, which you enjoy with Balaram. Ringana Keli Kule, Janani Shukakari, Vraya Drishta Sukrita, Spurat Avatari." Quote, "You give happiness to Mother Yasoda with your crawling, and the sight of you blesses the eyes of every last person in Vrindavan." Unquote. Kinkini Gana Ra Nane, Hrida Ruchi Dhare, Padayuga Chalana, Kutuka Vihari. Quote, "O child, the eager movements of your feet stir your anklets to make tinkling sounds that delight the hearts of all." Unquote. Akalita Janamaline, Tasmad Apa Shari, Jana Nim Prati Gati Chapala Bahari. Quote, "O Krishna, even when you meet strangers, you share your bliss with them and then quickly crawl back onto the safety of your mother's lap." Unquote. So those are some of the verses. He composed that song or those prayers after coming out of his faint upon that wonderful pastime. So later on, Jiva Goswami also worshipped another special deity, much later in his life, which he received after the departure of Srila Rupa Goswami. And that was the Govardhan Shila that Krishna had personally given to the aging Sanatana Goswami. So a nice description of his worshipping the murtis of the Lord. Now all this time, Srila Jiva Goswami was writing books. And he eventually wrote more than 25 different books, which included more than 550,000 Sanskrit verses. That's more than all the acharyas in our parampara put together have written. 550,000 Sanskrit verses. It's said that Srila Jiva Goswami would compose Sanskrit verses in his mind and immediately write them down with a metal stylus on palm leaves. And this method, this inscription method, just bear in mind it left no room for erasing, for editing, for rewriting, or running a spell check. I often run a spell check, documents I write. No. Each verse was a priceless gem of perfect meter, rhythm, poetry, and meaning. Perfect. And actually, he's considered the greatest philosopher in all of Indian history. Contemporary Sanskritists call him the greatest Sanskrit scholar who ever lived. And Srila Jiva Goswami's, you could say, primary literary contribution was the Satsandarbhas, which actually provide a written record of Lord Caitanya's teachings, and especially they defeat the impersonal school of thought. And Baladeva Vidyabhusana praised Jiva Goswami as such. He has written, quote, it's very poetic, by the mighty spade of his nectarian words, Jiva Goswami tossed aside the dirt of the fallacious Sankhya arguments and recovered Krishna's splendor from the pit of Vivart Avada. May he be our refuge. Unquote. Yeah. And Srila Prabhupada often noted the scholarly nature of Srila Jiva Goswami. In a Bhagavatam class in Detroit, 13th of June 1976, Prabhupada said, quote, Sri Jiva Goswami is the nephew of Sri Rupa Goswami. In the learned circles of Bengal, they say that such a big scholar and philosopher has not appeared in the past, and nobody expects a similar philosopher and learned scholar in the future. He was such a big personality. Jiva Goswami, big Mayavadis, they were afraid of Jiva Goswami's logic and argument to establish the Vaishnava philosophy, unquote. An interesting note in my research, I found that Jiva Goswami once traveled to the court of Emperor Akbar to participate in a very lengthy, heated debate where other scholars, with other scholars, over which river was greater, the Ganges or the Jamuna. And citing evidence given by his spiritual master, Sri Rupa Goswami, Jiva Goswami glorified the Ganges as water that had washed Krishna's lotus feet, but he concluded, or he showed, that the Jamuna was superior because she had many times bathed the Lord's entire body. So pleased with Jiva Goswami, Emperor Akbar wanted to offer him a gift. So what did Jiva Goswami request? He requested some paper. that he had noticed in the emperor's court, because at that time, paper was a rare commodity reserved for aristocracy. We take for granted so many things we have. I know I've heard when Srila Prabhupada was doing his commentaries on Srimad Bhagavatam in the Radha Damodar temple in Vrindavan, he also didn't have access to much paper. If he received a letter that was, blank on the other side, he would use that for his writings, or just any type of paper he could receive. So many gifts we have now. We have to be conscious of how fortunate we are. Yes. So, and the emperor also donated funds for constructing a library in Vrindavan to preserve the writings of the Goswamis. We've been hearing a lot about Emperor Akbar and how favorable he was to the 6 Goswamis. He must have achieved a very exalted destination after he left his body. And it's also written about him that one time, in an act of humility and great reverence, Emperor Akbar walked all the way to Vrindavan to meet and take shelter of Jiva Goswami. And at that time, Jiva Goswami blessed him. And he took him around to see the different Leela stones of the holy places in Vrindavan. Emperor Akbar went on parikrama with Jiva Goswami. And as Jiva Goswami's glories and fame spread, many saints and sages were coming to see him. One time a devotee told Prabhupada a famous story about Mirabai, a very saintly Vaishnavi, who's famous for her devotion and her songs about Krishna. So according to this story, the devotee told Prabhupada, Mirabai wanted to meet Jiva Goswami. She came to Vrindavan to meet Jiva Goswami. But Jiva Goswami sent back a message, quote, "I'm a sannyasi and you are a woman, so I cannot see you," unquote. Then according to the story, Mirabai sent a message back to Jiva Goswami saying, quote, "I thought that Lord Krishna was the only male in Vrindavan and that all others are female," unquote. So when Jiva Goswami heard this reply, he supposedly agreed to meet her. But when Prabhupada heard this story, he said, "This may not be true because in our line of sannyasis, we do not refuse to meet women." He said, "This is probably not true because in our line as Gaudiya Vaishnavas, we don't refuse to meet women." So it appears Jiva Goswami did meet with Mirabai. And we know, of course, that Janavamata, the eternal consort of Lord Nityananda, came to Vrindavan and met Jiva Goswami. By that time, Lord Nityananda had departed this world, and she brought some of his paraphernalia actually, and entrusted it to Jiva Goswami for safekeeping. And I have had the good fortune to see some of that paraphernalia in Vrindavan. So while Janavamata was in Vrindavan, Jiva Goswami took her on Vrindavan Parikrama and showed her many of the holy places. So while in Vrindavan, Jiva Goswami stayed in various places, including Radhakund. And there's presently a ghat, a bathing place at Radhakund called Jiva Goswami Ghat, where he would take his bath in both Shyamakund and Radhakund. And a short distance from the bank of Jiva Goswami's Ghat is a small cluster of bakul trees where Jiva Goswami would stay on his visits to Radhakund. And that bhajan kutir actually is still there today. And within that bhajan kutir, actually when you're doing Radhakund Parikrama, when you're going around, it's just a few meters off the Parikrama marg on the right. You go, and then there's Jiva Goswami's bhajan kutir, which is very next to the kund, next to Radhakund. And at that sacred spot, in the little shrine there's a very beautiful painting of Srila Jiva Goswami, painted many years ago by a wonderful disciple of Giriraj Swami. She was Mother Archa Vigraha Dasi, who has since departed this world, a very wonderful Vaishnavi, very artistic. So she painted this amazing painting of Srila Jiva Goswami, and it was kept a secret for many, many years, but now everyone knows. And when you go to Radha Kund and you go to that Bhajan Kutir of Srila Jiva Goswami, you can be inspired by that painting. So Jiva Goswami and Raghunath Das Goswami, who lived at Radha Kund, they were very close friends. And when Raghunath Das Goswami expressed a desire to renovate Radha Kund and Shama Kund, it was Jiva Goswami who did all the organizing. He was a good organizer. And he purchased the land, he oversaw the excavation of the kunds, he managed everything in all aspects, everything that took place. I was reading, he even got the disciple of Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, Rajman Singh. We spoke about him some lectures before. He took initiation from Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. He got Rajman Singh to, actually Rajman Singh, he helped build the Govindaji temple. So on this occasion, Jiva Goswami got him to build 8 steps on each side of Radha Kund. Rajman Singh did a lot of seva. In addition to all this renovation of Radha Kund and Shama Kund that Jiva Goswami was doing, because Raghunath Das Goswami was so dear to him, he saw to it that Raghunath Das Goswami was always taken care of. Because Raghunath Das Goswami was often so deeply absorbed in thoughts of Radha and Krishna while at Radha Kund, he was unable to relate to worldly affairs. He was just in samadhi, you could say. So Jiva Goswami took care of him. And later, in time, when Srila Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis left this world, Jiva Goswami became the leader of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas in Vrindavan, and you could say Bengal also. And at that time, Vaishnavas from Orissa and Bengal, they began flocking to Vrindavan for shelter. Srila Prabhupada has written, quote, Jiva Goswami was very kind to the Gaudiya Vaishnavas. Whoever went to Vrindavan, he provided with a residence and prasadam. Whoever went to Vrindavan, he provided with a residence and prasadam. All the while, he's rediscovering the lost places of Krishna's pastimes, like his uncles, writing books, worshipping deities, but he's attentive to the needs of the devotees, the Vaishnavas. So most notably, amongst those who came to take his shelter at different times, but who all came, were Srila Narottam Das Thakur, Shyamananda Pandit, and Srinivasacharya, who were all destined, you could say, to become the foremost preachers in carrying on the Sankirtan movement in future years. We described them the other day as the original second generation. And all three studied the Bhakti Shastras under the guidance of Srila Jiva Goswami for a number of years. But during that time, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, remember he'd left this world many years before, his Mahaprabhu's devotees in Bengal were literally dying in separation from the Lord. So Janava Mata, again Lord Nityananda's wife, she requested Jiva Goswami to send these 3 saints to Bengal. Nitai had also left. All the Panchatattva had left, actually. So Janava Mata was also a great leader amongst the Gaudiya Vaishnavas. And working together with Sri Jiva Goswami, they devised a plan to send Narottam Das Thakur, Shyamananda Pandit, and Srinivasacharya to Bengal with the entirety of the Goswamis' literature, all the original books of the Goswamis. It's a well-known Leela, so I won't go into detail now, but briefly, when they were taking those books to Bengal, all the books were stolen in a place called Vishnupura, and then they were miraculously retrieved by Srinivasacharya after he had sent Narottam to Keturi and Shyamananda Pandit to Orissa for preaching. That's it in a nutshell. It's a long story. You can read that also in, I mentioned it the other day, Sitala Dasi's book on Narottam Das Thakur. It's described in detail, that famous journey from Vrindavan to Bengal with the books. Her book's called Narottam. So during all these years, Jiva Goswami's Radha Damodar temple acted as a headquarters for reestablishing Vrindavan back to its former glories, and for fomenting plans to spread Krishna consciousness. Radha Damodar temple, when all the Goswamis were living, they would meet there regularly. They would take prasad there, and they would discuss Krishna Katha, Radha and Krishna's pastimes. And they would also discuss plans for establishing and spreading the Sankirtan mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu all over the world. So Jiva Goswami lived in Vrindavan for 65 years. Then in 1596, during the month of Posha, it's described, he himself wound up his pastimes and went back to Godhead to fully engage in the service of Radha and Damodar as the Gopi Vilasa Manjari. And according to his will, Jiva Goswami's sacred body was placed in samadhi also in the Radha Damodar temple, not far from Rupa Goswami's samadhi. There's a number of samadhis there. Bhugarva Goswami's samadhi, Jiva Goswami's, Rupa Goswami, others as well. Their samadhis are there. That was in his will. Not far, actually, from his Radha Damodar deity. So it's a very special place, Radha Damodar temple. When our Srila Prabhupada came to Vrindavan, he first lived in the Vamsi Gopal temple near Keshigat, but he would regularly visit Radha Damodar temple. And one night, in a dream, Prabhupada saw many Vaishnavas chanting around Rupa Goswami, who was sitting in the courtyard of his samadhi at the Radha Damodar temple, and looking at Srila Prabhupada in a very affectionate way. Prabhupada, he dreamt that. He was seeing Radha Damodar temple and seeing Rupa Goswami sitting there in that courtyard where his temple was, and Rupa Goswami was looking at Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada, it said he accepted the dream as a call. He said he accepted the dream as a call from Rupa Goswami, and he moved from the temple he was in to Radha Damodar temple. And one time Prabhupada told his disciples that his quarters at the temple of Radha Damodar in Vrindavan were the, quote, hub of the wheel of the spiritual world, unquote. Hub of the wheel of the spiritual world. And he also said that he resides there eternally. Hare Krishna. Now, as a small example of Jiva Goswami's grammatical expertise is seen in one of the verses he composed in his Gopal Champu. It's in the 15th Purana, or this 15th chapter of Gopal Champu. And there is a description of the gopis who are about to get married to the cowherd boys. Not Krishna, but the cowherd boys. So Vrinda Devi, it's described she's very eager to prevent these marriages and get all these gopis married to Krishna instead. So she anxiously approaches Purnamasi, who's her mentor, to find a solution. And Purnamasi assures her that all these gopis will definitely get married to Krishna, not the cowherd boys. And after a lot of convincing, Purnamasi sees that Vrindadevi needs one final assurance. And as a final assurance, Purnamasi Devi speaks the following verse to Vrinda Devi. This is the verse from Gopal Champu, to convince her that it's okay, don't worry. Jiva Goswami is writing, it's okay, don't worry. The gopis are not going to get married to the cowherd boys, they're going to get married to Krishna. So Purnamasi says this to Vrinda Devi. Avacham, avocham, uvacha, uvacha cha, let me get it right. Avacham, avocham, uvacha cha, vachmi hi vyakta smi vakshami, uchasham idam vach yam, vachani no ched avak sham cha. It's the best I can do, but I got it correct. Quote, this is what Purnamasi said to Vrinda Devi. I have said it in the past that the gopis will get married to Krishna. I have said it and I have said it. I am saying it now, I will say it, and I will say it. May I always say it. I must say it. And if I did not say it now, then I will never be able to say it again, that all the gopis will get married to Krishna. It's a famous verse. And why is this verse so famous? Har Prasad Prabhu has instructed us. This verse is an example of Srila Jiva Goswami's grammatical genius, because he has expertly used the Sanskrit verbal root vach, V-A-C, in all 10 tenses of Sanskrit grammar in one verse. This is exceedingly difficult. He's expertly used the Sanskrit verbal root vach in all 10 tenses of Sanskrit grammar. So this is how brilliant is Srila Jiva Goswami, that he took that one Sanskrit verb and said this in this phrase in all 10 tenses. Hare Krishna. That the gopis will get married to Krishna. Don't worry. So, he was such a brilliant scholar. 550,000 verses, many similar to that. And I'd also like to come to a conclusion here by two very beautiful prayers to Jiva Goswami. The first is by a Sri Rasbihari Shankyatirtha, who was a 19th century Vaishnava poet and writer. In his glorification of Srila Jiva Goswami, he says, and I quote, it's very beautiful, "To the peerless lotus feet of Srila Jiva Goswami, I offer constant obeisances. He is a desire-fulfilling tree who possesses a mind full of compassion and is a true friend of the fallen and distressed. Always considering himself to be a bee-like servant at the lotus feet of Sri Rupa Goswami and Sri Sanatana Goswami, he contributed many conclusions in his books to spread the glories and fame of Lord Krishna far and wide," unquote. And the second verse I'd like to begin concluding with is from the Sadhana Dipika of Srila Narayana Bhatta Goswami. And it's quoted in Bhakti Ratnakara 4289. Very beautiful verse. Shri Rupa Charana Dvanda Raginam Braja Vasinam Shri Jivam Satatam Bande Mandesva Nanda Dayinam. That one was easy for me. I offer my repeated humble obeisances unto Srila Jiva Goswami, whose heart is constantly attracted to the lotus feet of Srila Rupa Goswami. He is the crest jewel of all Vaishnavas, and due to his causeless mercy, he bestows unimaginable joy to even the non-philosophical, dull-headed, and lazy people by his deep philosophical views, unquote. Hare Krishna. Srila Jiva Goswami Prabhupada ki. Shri Radha Damodar ki, Shri Vrindavan Dham ki, the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan ki. So, as I've said many times, by Srila Prabhupada's grace, we've inherited the great, or you could say grave, responsibility as members of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness to carry on the teachings of Srila Jiva Goswami, both in his books and as how they are being presented to us by Srila Prabhupada in his books, to the people of the 21st century. Jiva Goswami and the 6 Goswamis, they appeared 500 years ago, but this movement is meant to go on for 10,000 years. So you could say almost we're like the immediate recipients of their mercy. What is 500 years later compared to 10,000 years? We're you could say still in the pioneer stage of Mahaprabhu's movement spreading all over the world. And we bear a great responsibility that these teachings are not lost. In the future, others will come and continue what we're doing now, but this is our time. Now is our time. And really we should have no other interest than to be the best examples of our predecessor acharyas and valiantly push forward this movement to the best of our ability. Each devotee has something unique to offer this movement. Every devotee has something unique, and altogether that's considered samkirtan. Prabhupada says samkirtan means the complete glorification of the Lord. But this should be, you could say, our foremost desire. Not that we neglect anything else, but I keep using the phrase, this is our heartbeat. In one sense, in an absolute sense, our personal lives are of little importance compared to the great task that's upon us. And if anything, our lives become glorious, become meaningful, if we dedicate our time and energy to the mission of Prabhupada and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Mahaprabhu said every town and village will someday chant and dance hearing his holy names. So this is all going to happen because Mahaprabhu predicted it, that his holy name would be heard in every town and village of the world. So it's going to happen whether we do it or not. But if we do it, then we become the recipient of Mahaprabhu's mercy. We become the recipient of all these great acharyas, we become the recipient of Srila Prabhupada's mercy. And what more could one desire than that? You could say literally we've been offered the same service that Narottam, Shyamananda, and Srinivas were offered. When I was first hearing of their pastimes, I was thinking, oh, I wish I was there during that time that I could, serve Mahaprabhu, serve the Goswamis by taking the books like this. I was thinking, what a wonderful seva. But literally we have, you could say, the same opportunities as they did. They studied the Bhakti Shastras, so we are studying the Bhakti Shastras. They understood and realized those books. We're, under Prabhupada's guidance, we're understanding and realizing our philosophy. And then they distributed them. So we're doing the same. We're distributing the books and we're finding innovative ways, especially now at this point in history, for distributing those books and putting on festivals and opening preaching centers and distributing prasadam. So we have the same opportunities as Srila Narottam, Shyamananda Pandit, and Srinivas Acharya. In one way, if you think of it like that. So we're also blessed in our own ways to be carrying on that mission. We're carrying on that mission. We are so blessed. We are so privileged. So let us really be part of a prediction that was made by Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. He made a prediction well into the future. As Mahaprabhu made a prediction into the future, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya also made a prediction, a very practical prediction, which we can identify, we should identify with, and take pride in being part of that prophecy of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. And what is that prophecy? It's one of my most cherished verses that I always look to for inspiration and guidance. and that is as follows. Tilaka vimala mala nama yukta pavitraha hari hari kale madhye evam babavuha. Quote, from the time that the holy name of Hari became manifest on the earth, Vaishnava folk appeared everywhere, adorned with beautiful tilak and neck beads, and equipped with the Maha Mantra. In this manner they became present in the very midst of the age of Kali and purified the atmosphere, chanting Hari, 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 Hare Krishna. So, thank you once again for giving me this opportunity to speak about our previous acharyas and the great mission that they established and the hopes that we all have for continuing that mission of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in service to our beloved Srila Prabhupada. So in a few days we'll be back again. I have yet to think about who we'll talk about, but we will be back. Thank you, Prabhu, so much. Shri Shri Gaura Nitai ki, Shri Shri Krishna Balaram ki, Shri Shri Radha Sundar ki, Vrindavaneshwari Shrimati Radharani ki, Shri Prabhupada ki, Srila Jiva Goswami Prabhupada ki, Shri Shri Radha Damodar ki, the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan Dham ki, Goloka Vrindavan Dham ki, back home, back to Godhead ki. Take everybody with us without exception ki. Go Pimanandi. Jai Jai Sisi Radhe Sham. Thank you.